Hello and welcome. My name is Justin Smith. I am the GIS manager for Cumberland County. And today we're going to be talking about addressing challenges that we see throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and more specific examples of Cumberland County. So we're going to start by talking about who has the authority for addressing in Pennsylvania. Then we're going to walk through some workflows for how address data is collected and managed. And we're going to talk about next generation 911 and what new requirements we're seeing. Then, how are we controlling quality in our GIS data? What kind of address systems are in place and are being used throughout the state? And what kind of problems we're seeing, specific examples with addressing. So why is there a picture of a road sign on the slide? Well, there is a road just over the Mason-Dixon line in Maryland called Chalk Road 1. So if your house number was 2, your address would be 2 Chalk Road 1. So there's an appetizer for the kind of address complications that we're going to be highlighting in this discussion. So in Pennsylvania, municipalities have the authority to number buildings and name streets. This authority was established in 1933. Even though municipalities have the authority, counties can work with their municipalities to assume addressing responsibility. And you can see we have an example here of Huntington County, who has created an ordinance and a policy for addressing throughout the county of Huntington. And this is useful because counties tend to have more resources than municipalities, and they can take a more holistic approach to addressing across jurisdictions and zip codes. So if we look at the number of addressing authorities throughout Pennsylvania, I did an inventory in 2019, and I found there are approximately 1,100 addressing authorities in the Commonwealth. Approximately half of the counties in the state have county-based addressing. A quarter of the counties have a mix between municipal and county addressing, and another quarter of Pennsylvania counties have solely municipal-based addressing. So if you look at this list on the right side of the screen, you can see Schuylkill County has municipalities that are in charge of addressing. Then you can see Snyder County. Union County is actually the addressing authority for Snyder County. And then Somerset, they have complete county-wide addressing. Then you go down here, you see Venango County. Venango County has county-wide addressing except for its 2 cities, Franklin City and Oil City. Those 2 cities maintain addressing responsibility at the municipal level. So we look at county GIS products. Addressing and address management is a large piece of county GIS. So we start with the municipalities, and in my county, Cumberland County, we have municipal-based addressing. So we have municipalities assigning road names, assigning road ranges, and assigning addresses. Then they provide that information along with subdivision in plans and new builds, new building permits to assessment and GIS. Assessment also produces parcel layer, which GIS uses as a base for also creating address points. GIS then works with the MSAG coordinator, the Master Street and Address Guide. That's what MSAG stands for. And there's a lot of acronyms that I'm throwing around this slide, so I'm going to do my best to spell them out when we kind of come across them. Well, starting with GIS, right? GIS stands for Geographic Information System. MSAG stands for Master Street and Address Guide. Then we have GIS producing the RCL and SSAP, the road centerline layer, and the site structure address points. Those road centerlines and address points go into the 911 system. At the county level, PSAP, the Public Safety Answering Point, and then also go into PEMA's, the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. They have a next gen 911 system, and GIS is now reporting to the next gen 911. So you can see here how address points are created and then functionally used in 911 systems. So what is that? What does the address point workflow look like? Well, we start with municipalities naming roads and assigning addresses, or could be the counties that are assigning address numbers to structures. Then the county coordinates with the municipalities, the telephone companies, assessment, 911, then to start actually getting that address information into GIS. There's a GIS editor actually putting those points on a map and making sure there's associated attributes for addressing with those points. Then we take that information and we do a 911 CAD update. So these first 5 steps to the life cycle, those are existing 911 workflows. And steps 3 through 5 are county GIS tasks. Then starting at number 6, we have Next Gen 911 responsibilities. So we have NENA standardization. NENA is the National Emergency Number Association, and they've developed standards that we sort of plug our GIS data into, so it's standardized. And then we have our Next Gen core service, quality control. We provision our data into PEMA so that they can route 911 calls using our GIS data. So at any given point, you could be at a different step of this process, right? It's a life cycle, it's cyclical. We're constantly adding new addresses. It's not just we get from 1 to 9 and we're done. We could be getting new addresses from the municipalities at the same time where we're entering other addresses or doing quality control to our data and provisioning it to PEMA. So we could be at different steps of this process at any given time. And each of these steps requires dedicated work. So what do the NENA standards look like? Here we have a table, and we'll get to that in a second, of what it looks like to parse our roads into the NENA standard. But I want to make a point in that before PEMA built their next generation core services, there were nationally recognized standards that existed that we could build our data upon, a good standard foundation that we could build our data upon. And that's important, right? So that the NENA standards have existed for about 10 years now. It's 2022. And they've existed for a while so that we've been able to start to plug our data into these standards, do a gap analysis on these of our data as compared to these standards, right? It's very good to have these standards in place before you build the functional element, which is the next gen core services. So here we have our road name elements, and we can have a road name of West Main Street using these civic location data exchange format that exists in the NENA standard. We can parse our data elements into their appropriate street address information fields. So West is our pre-directional, Main Street is our name, or Main is our name, and Street is our post type. When we look at our example of Schalk Road, we have Schalk being the name, road being the post type, and 1 being the post modifier. So you can see here there's a lot of different kind of unique street names that we can parse into our standard with these different field elements that we have in our next gen 911 GIS data model. So in Pennsylvania, we're moving towards next generation 911. And that really started in 2015 with a Pennsylvania law, but really in 2019, we had a reauthorization of that, Act 17, that now states that counties shall share their GIS data needed to support geospatial call routing. So now we have this mandate that counties have to share their GIS data for these geospatial call routing in the next gen core services. And so PEMA has contracted with Geocom to provide the GIS Data Hub service for providing Pennsylvania's spatial interface solution. And within that GIS Data Hub spatial interface solution, we have quality control functions, data merging to take data from 67 counties and make it into a single statewide layer. And it also passes that data onto the next gen core services for the geospatial call routing. So what does QC inside the Data Hub look like? So I put down, here's a list of critical errors that you could encounter in the Data Hub with our quality control. And I want to focus on that last bullet point. Duplicate address attributes on features in the site structure address point cause critical errors, okay? So we're going to be looking at address points with identical numbers, road names, and jurisdiction that cause critical errors and are not allowed in the Data Hub for geospatial call routing. So here's a specific example of duplicate addresses. And again, I'm not trying to call anybody out, just trying to show examples. There's many examples I could pick from to show addressing problems throughout the state, but I'm specifically looking at what's happening in my county just because I'm more familiar with that. So 110 Carlisle Road looks like it was subdivided between a residence and a commercial storage unit. And some of these specific examples, whenever you see this an asterisk, that represents a description, a specific description of the address that I'm representing on the map. Okay, so for this specific map example, we have the same owner owning both of these parcels along the same driveway. They're separate parcels, and you can see there's no room for additional addresses here. We go from 106 to 108 to 110. There's not really a room to squeeze in an address here. So in Cumberland County, we have an editing rule that each parcel with a structure should have an address point. And in Pennsylvania, in PEMA's best practice guide, it says that duplicate address attributes on different point features found in the same community cause ambiguity in the exact location of an address. And now I understand that it could be argued that since both these properties are owned by the same person, there's no need for two distinct addresses. But the owner could turn around and sell one of these properties tomorrow. And then you have two properties with the same address that could potentially have different owners, right? And that is a problem. If one of these addresses is getting mail that's intended for one and not the other, then we really do have a problem. So duplicate addresses are a problem in the Next Gen 911 system, and they can cause problems in real life. So synchronization. When we look at synchronization, we're trying to synchronize existing data, our MSAG, our master street and address range. We have an alley, which is the automated location information coming from telcos into 911. We have our road center lines and we have our address points. Those are GIS layers. And we want to synchronize all of them with each other to make sure our data is consistent and accurate. So here's an example of an MSAG listing from our master street and address guide. Here you can see we have a record for a road range from 100 to 699 D Street in Carlisle. So when looking down at the map, we can see our black line here is our road center line. This is the 400 block. This is the 500 block of D Street, well within our MSAG range of 100 to 699. And we can see here that the road center line represents the 400 block, starting at 400 to 499. And you can see these red dots represent each of those 100 addresses on that 400 block, right? Starting, so you can see 50, if you count them out, there's 50 points on each side of the road, representing the 50 odd addresses of the 400 block on the north side of the road and the 50 even addresses of the 400 block on the south side of the road. And you can see the actual address points here. This is 403 address 403 D Street. And you see this address point associated with the road center line here. And you can see the address point synchronized with the road center line synchronized with the master street and address guide, synchronization, synchronization, synchronization. Nina recommends a 98% synchronization rate between all these data sets. And a couple of slides ago, we talked about PEMA selected vendor Geocom and their GIS data hub tool. The data hub has quality control checks that produce lists of unmatched records that have not synchronized and need remediation. So here is a slide from just an example of what Arizona has a best practice guide. And this is a snippet from that showing what happens when you're doing your quality control, you don't have synchronization, you have incompatible data entries, they need resolution. What do you do about it? Well, what do you do if the customer address is not valid? What do you do if the customer address is valid and the GIS data is wrong? What do you do if there's no valid address that exists and you need to get a valid address? There's all these types of error resolutions that we need to that need to be resolved so that we can move on with addressing and get a really good synchronization rate and get good address information into our 911 system. So what kind of address systems do we use in real life? You know, what makes, whenever we're addressing, most addressing is done through a system. And addressing authorities should have a consistent address system, a way of addressing that has uniqueness, parity, and directionality. These are important elements of a good addressing system. And critically, addresses should make sense to those trying to find the address, right? Address confusion does lead to delays in emergency response, and fixing problem addresses has the potential to save lives. So this is an example of grid addressing. This map is from 1976, so it might be a little bit hard to read. Apologize for that. But in Hampton Township in Cumberland County, they use what's called grid addressing. So they use the Carlisle Pike as their zero range. And then as you move south or north, you start seeing the 100 block, the 200 block, and then you can see this, it says 400 right here. That's Trindle Road. As you pass Trindle Road, you get to the 400 block. So that's how communities can use grid addressing. Then you have interval addressing. And this is an example from Potter County using interval addressing. And you can see here we have Route 49 West and we have Route 49 East. Each of them has a different address increment. So Route 49 East has an address increment of every 12.5 feet, there's a new address. Route 49 West has an increment of 15.7. So every 15.7 feet, there's a new address. So you can see the importance of understanding and knowing what these, and managing these addressing systems, because you want to be accurate when you're addressing. Massachusetts has a guide, a best practice guide for addressing throughout the state. In Pennsylvania, there's more of a piecemeal approach to address consistency. Some jurisdictions are just more proactive about having good, consistent addressing. And I want to focus on the third bullet point in Massachusetts best practice guide for addressing. It says, if 2 or more developed properties are accessed via an unnamed access road or shared driveway, that road should be named and numbered accordingly. So it should have its own, it should have its own road name. If there's two properties along an unnamed road. And we'll get to that a little bit later in a specific example of that. So how do we assign new addresses? Well, municipal officials usually use a developer submitted plan to write down new addresses for a subdivision. So here we have a plan on the right, and here we have Haley Way. You can see there's black numbers in black circles. Those represent the lot numbers as assigned in the plan, and then you can see the municipal official has written in red the address numbers that will be assigned to these lots on Haley Way. So let's get into some examples of real world, really sticky addressing problems. So what our address point layer is trying to do is we're trying to map what these real world addresses look like in a digital form. Service delivery depends on accurate GIS data, not just your first responders, but parcel delivery they use GIS all the time to track where they are and where they need to go. And these real world problems exist. So most addressing problems that we find are historical. I'm not trying to call out anyone. For the most part, these addressing problems have existed before any addressing officials had even came into their job. So some of these addressing issues have been around for decades. And these problem addresses have been around before GIS or Next Gen 911 standards, before we had comprehensive mapping of individual addresses. So this comprehensive mapping of individual addresses is really bringing to light these problems with addressing more than we ever had before. And we can't forget about the field workers and the people with doing service delivery and emergency response. What do they see, right? So we come across a lane. We see a sign to the left of us. We see a sign to the right of us. We look at these addresses. We're trying to find 1333. We see 1331. We see 1332. Then we see 1334. Where's 1333? Well, it's over here, right there to our right. So what does looks like a fairly complicated sign for addressing. What does it look like on a map? Here we go. This is what this actually looks like when you look at it on a map. So this is basically a driveway access problem. We have a long driveway. We have multiple driveways that access properties that are addressed off a road where the driveway originates, right? So we have Pine Road right here. And then we have all these addresses off of Pine Road. Here, this green rectangle, that's where we see the sign in our previous slide. All of the numbers that you see on this map, these are all Pine Road addresses. So we have odds and evens on the same side of the street, right? This is the south side of Pine Road. Here we see an odd address. Here we see an even addresses. Odds and evens on the same side of the road, not recommended. And they're all split into multiple driveways, and they're between different municipalities, right? We have Dickinson Township here. All these purple addresses are Pine Road addresses in Dickinson Township. All these orange addresses are Pine Road addresses in Penn Township. So that just complicates matters when you're dealing with multiple jurisdictions. Then we have block addressing. I'm sure everybody's familiar with block addressing. From this street to this street, we're the 100 block. From this street to this street, we're the 200 block. That's how block addressing works. Well, in some cases, we get complications when each municipality recognizes a different road that divides north from south. So here we have Shiremanstown Borough, and here we have Lower Allen Township. Shiremanstown, they use East Main Street as their dividing line between North and South St. John's Road. Lower Allen uses Gettysburg Road as their dividing line between North and South St. John's Road. And here we have St. John's Road actually forming the boundary between Lower Allen and Shiremanstown. And we can see on the west side of the street, if you're standing on the west side of the street, you're in South St. John's Road. If you're standing on the east side of the street, you're in the 100 block of North St. John's Road. And luckily, we were able to coordinate with these municipalities, and this problem was fixed in 2013 with multi-municipal cooperation, cooperation, and this problem no longer exists. But this instance is what I would like to call one road, two names. And if there's a more elegant description for that, please let me know. But this occurs when you have the same street that forms a boundary between two municipalities, and the municipalities have a different name and numbering scheme depending on what side of the street you're standing on. You're standing in a different municipality. So this is the dividing line between Hampton Township and Mechanicsburg Borough. To the north and east, you have Hampton Township. To the south and west, you have Mechanicsburg Borough. And you can see here, Mechanicsburg Borough calls this street East Simpson Street. Hampton Township calls it Simpson Ferry Road. So we have a 110 East Simpson Street right here. If you go right across the street from 110 East Simpson Street, it's 5259 Simpson Ferry Road. And there are many addressing problems that exist because municipalities do not coordinate with each other, or have not coordinated with each other when they assign these addresses in the past. And this is an opportunity for our MSAG coordinator, or Master Street and Address Guide coordinator, to highlight these issues and suggest remediation. Mobile home parks can cause issues with multiple individual housing structures on a single parcel that have duplicate addresses. So here we have a mobile home park. Every single one of these housing units has an address of 1550 Williams Grove Road. And many times mobile home parks have lot numbers that can be used to differentiate them in the NINA data model building field. But this still leaves, even though we might have lot numbers that differentiate these buildings even at the same address, we're still left with multiple crisscrossing unnamed roads, right? So you're driving back here, how are you supposed to find lot 23 if all of these roads back here are unnamed and they just crisscross each other? And this is sort of complicated with service delivery, because the United States Postal Service has sort of a workaround in some of these cases where they say just use your lot number and the name of your mobile home community as the solution. So they could be using, lot number 23 Williams Grove Mobile Home Park instead of actually using this 1550 Williams Grove Road address. So that can cause complications when somebody's trying to communicate their address to 911. They're not using a valid NG 911 address to communicate their mobile home park address. So it's a complication. So when we talk about readdressing, there are some helpful tips that I like to talk about when we get to the point where we need to readdress. Number one, identify what the issue is. In Cumberland County, we maintain a list that details specific addressing issues. We work with 911 to document how these issues can impact service delivery. We talk to our local officials, and sometimes if there's an addressing problem, maybe there's a simple solution of just enforcing ordinances that already exist instead of having to go back and readdress. The next crucial step in readdressing is to actually plan out your addressing, your readdressing. So coordinate your change proposals with municipal officials. Have a list of proposed addresses, what the address was, what you propose that it's going to be. Try to change as little as possible with only one ask. Only ask once and try to change as little as possible. And then allow time for an effective date. Say that if you want to readdress some addresses, say this is going to go into effect January 1 of next year. So that everybody has time to get the change in place. And recognize that change is pain. You have to convince elected officials. Residents don't want to be bothered with an address change, and businesses have to go through a lot of red tape to change their address. So here's an example of a helpful form that one of our municipalities put together when they had to readdress. It shows all of the information that a landowner or residents needs to go through to actually get their address changed. You know, they might have to update their passport. They might have to talk to their bank and get their credit cards mailed to their new address. There's lots of issues that come along with potentially having to readdress. And you have to understand that that is a burden to the landowner or resident that has to change their address. So thank you. Again, here's my contact information. In the video description below, there's going to be additional links to new segments of other address problems. So thanks again for watching, and hope you learned a little bit more about addressing problems.